the point located exactly in the middle of a segment. So if we have some line segment and one point is at 2, 6 and another point is at 4, 14, we can find this point in the middle, the midpoint, and we can find those coordinates. And this will be the exact middle. So these two lines would be the same length, line segment parts. And the formula is right here. It's adding the two x's and dividing by 2, and adding the two y's and dividing by 2. So basically, essentially, we're finding halfway between the x's and halfway between the 2's, or the y's. So the first thing we want to do is we want to call these x1, y1, x2, y2. And it doesn't matter. I could have said these were x2, y2, and these were the 1's. That doesn't matter, just so long as both of these are 1's and both of these are 2's, or vice versa. You can't have a 1 and a 2 in the same parentheses. So to find the midpoint, I'm going to plug those points in. So x1, x2 divided by 2, comma, y1, y2 divided by 2. Well, 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 plus 14 is 20. I can divide both of those by 2 and I get 3, 10. So this point right here, this midpoint, would be located at 3, 10. Okay, so sometimes you're given the endpoints and you're asked to find the midpoint. Sometimes you're given one end point, so this is an end, this is the middle, and we want to find the other end. Okay, so if we were to draw that line, we'd have -4, 8 as one end, we'd have 6, -12 as the other end, and or the middle, and I'm missing that other end. So this would be x1, y1. And I can call that other end just xy if I want to, because I don't know what they are. There's some x and some y, and then I can find them. The way I do that is I know that my midpoint is going to be x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Well, my midpoint is 6, -12. x1 is -4, and I said that x2, you can see this is x2, y2, was just x. Or if you want, you can put the little 2 under there if that keeps things clear. And then I have y1, which is 8, but I don't know y2. And so now I have to solve these to find these missing values. I know that this will equal 6. And I know that this will equal -12. So if I set them each equal to what they actually equal, I now have two equations I can solve. So I've set these both equal to so I've made equations I can solve. The first step, I need to clear that 2, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. And I get -4 plus x equals 12. -4, to get rid of that, I'm going to add 4, because I always want to do the opposite. And so I get x is equal to 16. I'm always going to multiply by 2, like I said, to clear that 2. So that'll be negative 24. And then this is a positive 8, so since it's positive, I'm going to subtract from both sides. And I get negative 32. So this other end right here is the point 16, negative 32. So if you're given the end point and you're given the middle, so you're given an end in the middle, so oops, the ends are always x1, y1, and x2, y2. So I can call this x2, y2, because I don't know what it is. And this is my middle. And your formula for the midpoint, again, x1 plus x2 over 2, y1 plus y2 over 2. Well, I know the midpoint is negative 5, 2. This is x1, so that's going to go here. This is y1, so that's going to go here. Does that make sense? So I'm going to plug those in. 3 plus x2, negative 6 plus y2. So I'm plugging in the end I have. Well, what I'm going to do is this equals that. So 3 plus x2 divided by 2 equals negative 5. And this equals that. So negative 6 plus y2 divided by 2 equals 2. Okay, so that'll always be the same. The x equals the x, the y equals the y. And then you always multiply by 2 to cancel these out. So you get 3 plus x2 equals negative 10. Then if this number is positive, you subtract from both sides. Now, I have a negative and a negative, so since they're both negative, I add them together and I get negative 13. Again, always multiply by 2 to cancel those out. If this is negative, you add it to both sides. So my end point is going to be negative 13, 10. Later, when we are working with triangles, this is going to come up. So I figured I would go ahead and we would get exposed to it earlier, so you'd already know how to do this part of that problem. And we have triangle with vertices at these points, and we want to find the midpoint of each side of the triangle. So if we have some triangle, L, M, N, right? We want to find the various midpoints. So midpoint here, midpoint here, midpoint here. So we can maybe call that M1, M2, and M3. Maybe not M, because there's an M on the triangle. That would be silly. How about point 1, P1, P2, and P3. We want to find these 3 points. Okay. So what we need to do is we have to find the midpoint on side LM. Right? That's one side. Yeah, P1 would be that midpoint. We need to find the midpoint on MN, and we need to find the midpoint on LN. So that's how the letters will match up to find our midpoints. So these are the sides. Okay. So to find the midpoint on LM, that's going to be 0.1. And I'm just going to write the formula up here so we have it again. Okay, so I'm going to plug in these points. So for LM, I'm going to be using these two, L and M. So this would be x1, x2. So -3 plus -1 divided by 2, and then 2 plus 6 divided by 2, because that's y1 and y2. So -3 plus -1 is -4. 2 plus 6 is 8. -4 divided by 2 is -2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So to find the midpoint of MN, we're going to be finding 0.2. So I'm going to be using M and N. So I have -1 plus 1 divided by 2 and 6 plus 3 divided by 2. Well, -1 plus 1 is 0, and 6 plus 3 is 9. And 0 divided by 2 is 0, and just leave that as a fraction. All right, our last side, we did LM, we've done an MN, we need to do LN. So that's 0.3. So I'm going to use L and N, so I have -3 plus 1 and 2 plus 3. So that's going to be -2 and 5. So -2 divided by 2 is -1, and again, you can just leave that as a fraction. Okay, so slope refers to the steepness of a line. The higher the slope, the more steep the line is. So a line like this would have a higher slope than a line like this. And slope is represented by the letter M because it also stands for magnitude. So that's where the M comes from, is the word magnitude. So this is high slope. This is low slope. Okay. There are a lot of ways to calculate slope. The idea, though, is that slope, which equals M, is how far you move up over how far you move over. So we have rise over run. Okay. The rise is the change in the Y. And the run is the change in X. We would do our rise, so how many spaces are we moving from here to here? Well, if we count up, I'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 spaces. And my run is how many spaces from here to here. So if I count over, I'd go, oops, I didn't go far enough. So let's do from, so I'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So my slope on this one would be 11 over 9, because I went up 11 and over 9. And then we have what's called the slope-intercept form of an equation. It's a linear equation. Linear equation just means a straight line. That's what linear equation means. So this is the equation of a straight line. In this form, we have y equals mx plus b, and m is still the slope. And then b is the y-intercept, which is where the graph or the line crosses the y-axis. Now, sometimes we're given the equation in this format. We get y equals some number x plus or minus some number. And when that happens, whatever number is right here, that's our slope. For example, if I gave you y equals 3/2 x minus 6. Well, the slope is 3/2. Sometimes it's really easy. It's already done for us. But sometimes we're in a different format, and we need to make this look like y equals mx plus b. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to maneuver some things around. I want x to be on the other side of the equal, so I'm going to take this x and I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to move it over here. But if I move to the other side, that was an h, I have to change the sign. Anytime you pick something up and move it from one side of the equal to the other side of the equal, you change its sign. So if it's positive, you make it negative. If it's negative, you make it positive. It's the same thing as saying I subtract it from both sides or I add it to both sides. And that's perfectly legal to do. You can pick things up and you can move them to the other side. You just have to change their sign. And if you think about it like sports team, if this guy got traded from this team to this team, he would not wear the same jersey. Right? He'd have a new jersey. So he changes signs. So the y stays the same. The x was positive, so now it's negative, and the 7 stays the same. The next thing we want to do is we want to get rid of the coefficient on the y. So you divide by the coefficient on the y. And you have to divide all terms. So I'm going to take this -4 and I'm going to divide everything by -4. Which leaves me with a y. -2 over -4. Negative over a negative is a positive, so it's positive 1/2. And 7 and 4, they don't divide, so I just bring the negative out front and make it 7/4. And when I do this, I now know my slope. And that tells me how steep or not this line is. And this line is not very steep because the slope is only 1/2. So I'm going up 1 and then over 2. So it's not a very steep line. All right, so horizontal lines have a slope of 0. So for this line, m equals 0. And the line is of the form y equals some number. This n is just any random number. So if this line was at 4, it would be y equals 4, would be the equation of that line. Okay. Vertical lines, so lines that go straight up and down, the slope is undefined, so m is undefined. and they're of the form x equals some number. So if this was 1, 2, 3, this line would be x equals 3. So you just find where the line hits the y or the x-axis, and that's the number that it equals. 8. Okay, so why it's undefined? Slope is rise over run, right? Well, it's going up and down, straight up and down forever, so the rise is infinity. But the run is how far it goes sideways. Well, that's 0. And we cannot divide by 0. That's a big fat no. So this is undefined. That's why. It's because there's no sideways motion. If there's no sideways motion, then the run is 0, and then you're dividing by 0, which you're not allowed to do. Here, the reason the slope is 0 is because my rise is 0, and my run is infinity. And anything, 0 divided by anything equals 0. So 0 on top, cool, no problem. 0 in the denominator is not allowed. Why you can't divide by 0? Sure. 6 divided by 3 is 2, right? That means that 2 times 3 equals 6. Right? So 6 divided by 3 equals 2, so 3 times 2 equals 6. It's like it's circular. Zero times what would equal 6? There's nothing there, right? Because 0 times everything is 0. So there's no number I could put here to make this true. So it's undefined. That's why you can't divide by 0. Calculate our slope. This is the slope formula. So slope formula. Okay, so m is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And so we do the same kind of numbering that we were doing before. Okay, and then you just plug in those numbers. y2 is negative 9. Minus y1 is negative 1. x2 is 7. x1 is 5. Okay, anytime I minus a negative, it ends up being positive. So that's negative 9 plus 1. And then 7 minus 5 is 2. Negative 9 plus 1 is negative 8. And negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So my slope is negative 4. Oh, we didn't talk about that. Positive slope, the lines move upward as we move from left to right. Negative slope, the lines move downward as we move from left to right. So positive slopes go up, negative slopes go down. Sometimes you're given most of the information. Find x if the slope of the line through these 2 points is negative 3. So this is m. I have x1, y1. I'm missing x2. I have y2. Now, I have to have, in order to do this, I can only be missing one piece of information. I can't be missing this whole point. I have to have at least one of these. Otherwise, there's no way to solve it. So what I do is I plug in everything that I do know. So I have negative 3 is equal to negative 11 minus negative 2 over x, that's x2, minus 1. So this is the information I had. This is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So if I simplify that, I get negative 3 is equal to negative 11 plus 2 over x minus 1. or negative 3 is equal to negative 9 over x minus 1. Now, I'm going to show you a trick, the math trick. Okay. If I have a number by itself on one side of an equal, and I have something with a variable on the bottom denominator on the other side, also by itself, I can just take these two things and I can trade places. And this ends up being x minus 1 is equal to negative 9 over negative 3. And the reason that works is because to clear out this x minus 1, I would multiply both sides by x minus 1. So let me just show you that up here. I'd have to multiply both sides by x minus 1. And so I'd get negative 3 times x minus 1 is equal to negative 9. And then to clear this negative 3, I would divide both sides by that. So I'd get x minus 1 equals negative 9 over negative 3. Well, I can skip all that and just use my trick and just change their places. So from here, I can go directly to x minus 1 is equal to negative 9 over negative 3. So that's a nice little shortcut. And it only works if you have this exact setup where you have a number equal to a fraction and your variables in the denominator. And you can just change these two places.
How come you don't have to choose the sign?
Because I'm not, you change the sign when you're adding or subtracting from both sides. So when I was moving that 2x over, I was technically subtracting it from both sides. This is division and multiplication, and so you don't change the signs when you're doing that. Does that make sense? Okay. So negative 9 divided by negative 3 is positive 3. And then I add 1 to both sides. And I get 4. So again, these two things traded places. We're going to talk about perpendicular and parallel lines. So lines 1 and 2 appear to be parallel. Okay. Line 2 and 1 appear to be perpendicular, and lines 2 and 3 appear to be perpendicular. So they look like they're at right angles. If I have parallel lines, they're lines that lie in the same plane, like 1 and 3, and they never intersect. They have identical slopes. So this is really the important. Let's do highlighter. They have identical slopes. Okay. Perpendicular lines are lines that intersect at 90 degrees, and the slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. Okay, so what that means is parallel lines, slope of line 1 is equal to the slope of line 2. So 2 and 2 would be parallel. So okay, so if the slope of the first line was 2, the slope of the second line is 2, those are parallel lines. Negative reciprocals of each other. If the slope of line 1 is 2 still, so that's going to be perpendicular to a slope of -1/2. So 2 is parallel to 2. 2 is perpendicular to -1/2. So to be perpendicular, you flip it over, so you take the reciprocal and you do the opposite sign. So if you start with a negative, the perpendicular slope is going to be positive and flipped. If you start with a positive, you're going to flip and it'll be negative. Whereas if you're talking parallel, if you have a positive, your parallel slope is positive. If you have a negative, your parallel slope is negative. They're identical. Equation of line 1. This equation is y equals -1/2 x plus 1. The equation of line 3 is y equals -1/2 x plus 0. But you don't really add the plus 0. Because remember I said this was the y-intercept? And I know this is 1 because it's hitting right here at 1. And I know this is 0 because it's hitting at 0. If I figure out the slope of line 2, I'm up 1, 2 over 1. So line 2 is y equals 2x minus 3. So see how my slopes are negative reciprocals of one another? These two lines are perpendicular. And here my slopes are identical. These two lines are parallel. Have a line with a slope of -5. The slope of the paraline is also going to be -5. It'll be the same. And the slope of the perpendicular line, well, the reciprocal of 5 is 1/5. And since we want it to be the opposite sign, it's going to be positive 1/5. To answer this question, we want to find the slope of the line parallel, so same, to the line with the given equation. So what I need to do is I need to first I have to make this look like y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to take that 2x plus 3y equals 12. I'm going to pick up this 2x and I'm going to move it. So I'm going to move the 2x and change the sign. Okay, so that becomes 3y is -2x plus 12. And then I'm going to divide everything by 3. So divide by 3, divide by 3, divide by 3. And I get y is equal to -2/3 x plus 4. Okay. Since I want the parallel slope, this is my slope, right? So m equals -2/3. Well, parallel m will be the same. And if I had been asked to find the perpendicular slope, if the parallel, or if the slope is -2/3, perpendicular would be +3/2. So opposite sign flipped over. So parallel is the same, perpendicular is opposite and flipped.